Welcome to the bright side of longevity. Join Dr. Roger Landry and guests as they discuss the bright side of getting older through healthy longevity. Guided by research, this lighthearted and educational discussion will leave you with practical tips and ways to impact your lifestyle to brighten life's journey. Harriet Hodgson has been a freelance award-winning writer for more than 40 years and is the author of 45 books. Hodgson is a member of the Association of Healthcare Journalists and Minnesota Coalition for Death Education and Support. In addition, she is a contributing writer for the Caregiver Space website, the assistant editor of the Open to Hope Foundation website, and contributor to the Grief Toolbox website. She is also a member of the Compassionate Friends, an international organization for those who have suffered the loss of a child. Hodgson has appeared on more than 185 talk shows, including CBS Radio and CNN. A popular speaker, she has given presentations at caregiving, public health, Alzheimer's, and bereavement conferences. Her work is cited in Who's Who of American Women, World Who's Who of Women, Contemporary Authors, and other directories. Today's topic is resilience and creativity throughout a lifespan.
Well, welcome everybody. Glad to have you with us. Danielle, good to see you again, and all looking healthy there in Florida.
Good to see you as well. And I'm really excited about today's guest. As a fellow author, she blows my work out of the water. She's done so much stuff, but I'll let you cue it up, Roger.
You've been so productive in the last year. There aren't many people who could outdo you, but our guest today is one who has, but she's had a little more time, so you can catch up, Harriet Hodgson, I have known for a very long time. Her husband and I were in the same field, aerospace medicine. And so we would go to national meetings, and the wives usually went. And so my wife, Paula, got to know Harriet very well. Harriet was both a wife supporter, but also a contributor because of her knowledge of so many things. You heard in the introduction here that how active she is, but she has written so many books. But the reason I chose her today, if that wasn't enough, is that she has had life experiences that are, I won't say unique, but they're definitely not as common, and have certainly tested her resilience, and that is a big topic since the pandemic. And we've been talking a lot about resilience because it seems like we've all been tested. Some of us came through, some of us came through stronger, some of us did not. And so I think we all know we need resilience. Enough of me. Harriet, welcome. I'm so happy you're here, and thank you for sharing this time with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we would be remiss if we didn't, It was Paula who reminded me, you have a lot of authors, how about Harriet? I said,
she can do my PR.
Yeah, she's your PR. She's a publicist. That's right. So, Harriet, I happen to know some things about your life, and I want to tell our guest, Harriet knows a thing or two, as they say, about resilience. And I think it was around 2007, you said that the focus of your work had changed from health and wellness. And I think you still write about health and wellness, although it's maybe not the focus it was before, but it's still about making people healthier and more well. And so but you changed your usual topic from health and wellness to grief. So would you share what happened to cause that shift?
Yes, and I certainly didn't anticipate it happening. In 2007, 4 family members died in a row. My elder daughter died from the injuries she received in a car crash. The same weekend, on a Sunday, my father-in-law died. And then about 2 months after that, my brother and only sibling died. And I happened to be the grandmother of twins. And 6 months after my brother died, the twins' father died. So my husband, John, and I would, we were kind of chugging along and we would get to feel better. And then another family member would die. And having two loved ones die on the same weekend, I must admit, was horrifying. And when I looked in the newspaper and I saw two family photos and I saw the family name printed twice, I got hysterical. And then, of course, I had no inkling at the time that two more family members would die. So I think when this happens, life gives you several choices. Choice number one is you can wait to be rescued. Choice number two is you can be proactive. Choice number three is you can sit around and wait to die. And I chose choice number two. And so a week after my daughter died, and I mean this truly, 7 days, I sat down at the computer and I started to pour my heart out in words and pour my grief out in words. And I sold that book. And I also sold several others. And, this was not conscious. I think this was life steering me in a different direction. And I don't say I write grief healing books. I say I write grief reconciliation books. I don't think you ever heal from grief. It just becomes part of you and it becomes part of your soul.
Well, we talk a lot about life throwing curveballs. Wow. They just kept coming at you, didn't they? Well, yes. We're all happy that you chose door number two.
Yeah. And on top of that, we know you recently lost your husband after a long illness, and you were the caretaker. So yes. Talk more about what you did to work through your grief. You shared some of it, and there's no amount of condolences I can offer you with that question. So I'm just going to shut up because I'm going to start crying and then Roger's going to start crying.
My husband, John, and I were married for 63 years. And actually, I was a family caregiver for 23 years. I cared for my mother who had vascular dementia. I cared for my twin grandchildren when they were orphaned. John and I became their guardians and raised teenagers again. And then my grandchildren graduated from high school with honors, graduated from college with honors. But my husband's aorta dissected unexpectedly. And his aorta had given him problems 8 years prior to that, and Mayo installed a Dacron descending aorta. And we found out what happened is the Dacron descending aorta separated from his real aorta, and he was dying. And I got to the ER, and they couldn't pump blood in fast enough. And I became his caregiver that night. And it was a long journey. I was his caregiver for 7 years. I learned a lot of things I didn't know before. I'm not a medical person, but I learned about sterile technique, and I learned how to give medications. I learned how to lift him properly. We did all of those things. And of course, he was a physician. And so he knew he was dying, and we didn't talk about it, which still surprises me. And I think it's because after 63 years of marriage, you pretty much talked about everything. And we trusted each other. I must admit, I'm the person who looks for linking sentences and beginning sentences. And one evening we were watching television, and without any preamble, I turned to him and said, "So you want your ashes scattered at the cabin, right?" I couldn't believe I said that. The minute I said it, I wanted to take the words back. But John, being John, one of the most humble, strong people I have ever known, just turned to me and said, "Yes." And that was it. But then it got more complicated because COVID hit.
Oh.
So we live in a retirement community owned and operated by Mayo Clinic. We have all the same rules and regulations as Mayo Clinic. And so basically, we were all asked to stay in our apartments. People came and delivered coffee to us. Sometimes they delivered wine and cheese. Meals were delivered to our door, but we were basically isolated. And I was grateful that John and I had such a wonderful relationship. I think he knew me better than I knew myself. And because I'm used to writing at home, I wasn't disturbed by this. And so, COVID hits and I cranked out 3 books, much to my own surprise. I wrote 2 workbooks for kids. And then I wrote a book that I never thought I would write. And it leads back to how I coped with my husband's illness, because I started doing 2 things. One was making Japanese Enzo circles. I don't know if you have heard of them, but you meditate for a few minutes, and then when one brush stroke and black ink, you make the best circle you can. And I made an Enzo circle every morning. And sometimes my circles were pretty darn good, and sometimes they were ovals, sometimes they were cockeyed. And then I also had one of my, 2 of the workbooks I wrote for children were illustrated with doodle art. And I thought, what the heck is doodle art? I have a master's degree in art education. Why don't I know about this? I didn't know about it because I was a caregiver for 23 years. I looked up doodle art and I thought, well, goodness, I've had lots of art courses, more than I can name. I thought I can do this. And so after I did the Enzo circle, I started doodling, and I doodled for about 15 minutes early in the morning. And it was almost like getting a nap. And after I finished, I felt refreshed. I felt ready to take on the day. I felt ready to be a better caregiver. And those are 2 of the ways I coped.
Masterpiece provides communities with personalized content that keeps residents engaged and focused on their unique pathway to healthy longevity, no matter the circumstance or external influence. Powered by Masterpiece provides communities with the data and research needed to drive both the resident and community forward. Learn more at mymasterpieceliving.com.
So why do you think that that grief doodling, and that book that you wrote on grief doodling just won a national award? Congratulations. And
Thank you.
why do you think it's so effective in reducing stress?
Well, first of all, there are 2 kinds of doodling. The doodling you do in a class or when you're waiting for someone accesses the subconscious. The other kind of doodling accesses the conscious, although you can access both at the same time. But what's so wonderful about doodling is there are no mistakes. I mean, everybody can doodle. You could make a case that the cavemen were the first doodlers. Everybody can doodle. It's interesting, the more I researched it, I found out that people tended to doodle the same things. President Reagan, for example, doodled cowboys. I am a terrible gardener. I call myself Mrs. Black Thumb, and I tend to doodle flowers. What does that say? It says, maybe I wish I was a better gardener. But there are no mistakes. You already know how to do it. It's very calming. There are different kinds of doodle techniques. And in the end, you've discovered something about yourself, because when you are doodling, it's not mindless activity. Your mind is still working, functioning, gathering data, weighing options, making decisions.
I find that fascinating for three reasons. Number one, I have to look up the Enzo circle, and I guarantee you I will never have a perfect circle as I'm not an artist. But I loved what you said about people doodling the same thing, and the fact that you started it after meditation, because I've led meditation, and it's amazing how many people have the same recurring thoughts. So I'm so curious how what they're doodling is saying about what's going on in their mind. And to your point about drawing flowers, I would be so self-judgmental about, oh, this is not a good picture. So what does that say about me? You say about gardening, I'd be judging my doodles.
But you don't want it to be a good picture. And so all of this led to me becoming a doodle artist. I am a doodle artist. I've had exhibits and people have purchased my work. But I've never used the word so often. You want everything to be wonky. Is that a word you use?
That's one of my favorite words.
The wonkier, the better. And so it's a riot because the doodles that I think are going to be good are not good. And the doodles that I think are, kind of odd and too wonky turn out to be good.
See, Danielle,
it's a discovery.
We've been trying to tell Danielle not to be so hard on herself. She's,
yes.
I don't say she's a perfectionist, but she falls just short of perfection is her goal. So now you heard it from Harriet, Danielle.
And I think we should change the name of this episode from, resilience and creativity to, the wonkier, the better. I think your newest book is Daisy a Day, Hope for a Grieving Heart. Can you tell us more about this and some of the other projects that you're currently working on?
I wrote Daisy a Day after John died. And, I have a whole collection of grief books. I'm assistant editor of a grief support website. So I have all these books, and I went and took some of them off the shelf, and I realized I didn't want to read any of them. In fact, when I saw a long paragraph, I was completely turned off. And I thought, what am I looking for? I'm looking just for a few words to get me to the next minute, the next hour, the next day. And that led to Daisy a Day. I thought Daisy was hopeful. I love the look of a daisy with its yellow center and white petals. And it was, I must say, difficult writing because it was almost like writing poetry. So it's 365 readings. All of them are short, about 4 sentences. The readings are divided into categories, like one uses the term finding balance. And then there's a lot of information in these short readings, the information that I have read or information that I have lived. For example, one reading talks about getting a driving buddy. And after our daughter died, John and I were so afraid that we were going to have another accident. And yet we had to go out in the car, we had to get groceries and so forth. So we decided one of us would be the driver, one of us would be the lookout, and we changed roles every time we got in the car. So that's a very practical tip. I described it in 4 sentences, but it's something that people can use.
Superb. Well, yeah, it is even with all the writing, you still find time to belong to numerous organizations, and some are centered around healthcare and journalism and death and dying. Do you have a favorite? Do you have one that you'd like to share what they do, one of the organizations that's near and dear to your heart?
I would, and it's the Compassionate Friends. And the Compassionate Friends is an international organization for those who have suffered the loss of a child. And there are local chapters all across the United States and in other countries. And I found when I went to the Compassionate Friends, I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to be careful in the words I chose. I could just be me. I could share my grief. I talked with other parents whose children had died in car crashes or died of an overdose. It is the most supportive organization. I'm proud to be a member. I've done Zoom conferences for them, national conferences. And in August, I'm going to Houston, Texas, giving a workshop on grief doodling and another workshop on affirmation writing. So it's a fine organization, and I must say, around Christmas time, they have an international candle lighting, and you light a candle in memory of your loved one at a certain time, and as the time changes, the candles are lit all over the world.
Wow.
Yeah, an astronaut could probably see a wave of light as they go. Right?
Okay, so did I read this right? You have 45 books currently published.
Well, I'm
I was going to say it's up to
yes,
50 now.
No, the 45th one comes out, let me see, September 13th. And it's a children's story that I wrote, actually based on a poem that I wrote many years ago. The poem is called First Steps, First Snow. The poem is a true experience at the family cavern after a blizzard. Our kids were asleep and John and I went out for a walk, and the moon was bright, moonlight glistened on the snow, and it was just a fairyland. So I wrote the poem, and it was published in the American Poetry Anthology. And after John died, I thought, well, these are all the things I've done. But what do I still want to do? People who are getting older still have goals. A lot of people don't realize that, but we do. And I thought of that poem, and I thought, boy, it would be a wonderful children's book if I found the right illustrator. So I searched for an illustrator, found the perfect one. The illustrations are beautiful. Most of them are double pages. There are discussion questions at the end. And the Children's Book Review just gave it an outstanding rating.
Wonderful. And I thought you were going to say you illustrated it yourself with your art and background and doodling background.
I'm not that kind of an artist. I suppose I could have illustrated it with doodle art, but I wanted someone who could do a beautiful job of drawing the forest trees and animals in the forest. And that's the person that I found.
Roger, she's not an illustrator yet. Give her 6 months.
With all of her spare time, you'd think she would be, What do you do in your spare time? No, that's not a real question. Well, let's go to where the rubber meets the road regarding the topic today, and it's about resilience. So what's the one particular message, and there can be many, that you'd like to share about resilience, especially working through grief?
I've already mentioned a couple of things. I think we forget that all life is a miracle. And so I kept saying to myself, don't waste your miracle. Don't waste your miracle. I think also setting goals helps. I mean, even if the goal is, say, I will make it to the next minute. I may be sobbing, but I'm going to make it to the next minute. That's a goal. I think you have to face emotional pain. Grief experts say the only way to get through grief is to feel the pain. In fact, if you let yourself feel the pain, and it is acute, you may shorten your grief experience. Another thing I think is important is to embrace quiet. I mean, we know friends who have suffered the death of a loved one, and they decide to make their lives busy, busy, busy. They race from one thing to another, as if they're going to outrun grief. You're never going to outrun grief.
We had a third person who does this podcast with us, Teresa Beshwaite, and she just finished a book called Life Reconstructed, and she would agree totally with what you just said about feeling the grief. You don't run away, you don't pretend, you don't distract. The best way to get through it, and it doesn't mean it's going to be fast or anything. It's something that's going to be probably with you for the rest of your life, but at different levels.
Well, I also think you have to be good at being kind to yourself. And this is something that I really had to learn because I have a caregiving personality. I found that out in the 23 years I was a caregiver. And I thought, I've got to be better about what I'm eating. I'm very aware of what a good diet is. But after John died, like ice cream was dinner, that kind of thing. And I gave myself a good talking to and said, you love to cook decent meals for yourself. Surprisingly, I slept well. I just moved to John's side of the bed.
Aww.
I mean, there was only one of us in the four-poster, but I moved to his side of the bed. And the other thing is that when you feel stronger, you may be able to reach out to others, and that can help you. I describe it as giving yourself away. And I try to give myself away each day.
Well, you certainly do that with literature. Thank you. That's a beautiful answer, isn't it, Danielle?
Yes, and I want to remember the miracle. You said it so brilliantly, and I want to make sure that I got to write it down.
Well, Einstein said there's two ways to look at life, as if everything's a miracle and if nothing's a miracle. And we know what she chose. Sorry, Danielle.
No disrespect to Einstein, but I think I like Harriet's better. Harriet, what did you say about your miracle?
All life is a miracle. I mean, even microbes, all life is a miracle. And I thought, well, here I am. There's more living to be done. There are more memories to be made. And I kept saying, don't waste your miracle.
Don't waste your miracle. That's what I want to remember. I'm writing it down.
I have one more question, though. And that's about, and I hate to do it because I'd like to end it right on the miracle. That's so beautiful. But in any case, how does one stay creative throughout the lifespan? Resilience or not, grief or not, how does one stay creative and productive? Because that's not the common experience.
I think it depends a lot on your genetics. I was born a creative person. I was always interested in art, always making something. I made books for neighbors when I was 8 years old. I never dreamed that I would become an author, but I did. And people say to me, well, how can you do doodle art and keep writing? Well, doodle art is my relaxation. So when I've had, several hours of writing, I go do doodle art. And it relaxes me tremendously. I've had to be careful. I love to bake. Unfortunately, I'm my own best customer. So I cut back on that. But, some people are creative, and you don't have to be creative just in the arts. You can be creative in other ways. You can join a board in your neighborhood, some organizational board, or volunteer. And that's a way of retaining creativeness. But I think it's important to keep changing and growing. Again, don't waste your miracle.
All right, before we wrap up, where can people go to learn more about you and your work? And we'll be sure to also put that information in the description of this podcast.
You can go to my website, which is harriethodgson.net. Harriet is spelled with one T. Hodgson is difficult, Hodgson. But when I looked into my husband's big brown eyes, that was it. I have stumbled over my own name. It kind of makes you want to raise the British flag, but I am harriethodgson.net. And you'll find lots of stuff on my blog, which is part of my website.
I bet they will. Well, Harriet, you are an inspiring person. You have to take care of yourself. You're a national treasure. And we want to thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and experience and with all of us. And I think there's some lessons here that, as they say, have legs, meaning they can be very useful for a lot of people. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Roger and Friends, The Bright Side of Longevity. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.